Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are here for another one of your questions about work. And there are certain topics that we just keep coming back to because we need to hit them in the ways that are most valuable for people and leaders, and they're just that important. And so for those of you who are here for the first time, I'm Roy. I'm a startup investor in the future of work. And today I'm here with my friend, Jeff. And Jeff has had one of these careers that spans government, from working on Capitol Hill, being a public defender, executive at several tech companies, including MySpace, running digital for the NFL, and now runs magnet companies, which I'll let you describe, investment and operating firm that I'll let you can share how you work with companies. And Jeff has been writing about what companies ought to do when social issues come up. And so that's the question today is, should, some social issue has come up. I mean, unfortunately, we had yet another example yesterday here in the US. Should my company take a stand? And I think what's implicit in that is sort of like, when, on which issues and when should my company take a stand? And would love any and all wisdom.
Yeah, I mean, the stunning thing for me in the, probably 6 months that I've been significantly focused on how to answer this question is, it doesn't seem like anyone has a framework for how to approach this within their companies and balance. Everyone thinks companies, we're in a capitalist society, we should be making profit. That's our focus. We serve our shareholders. That's it. The reality is the history of corporations is not just about serving shareholders. It's about serving the public and serving stakeholders. And we now are in a world where those stakeholders increasingly are vocal. There is no more neutral. Neutral, to the extent it ever existed, is dead. And we have to come up with a framework for making these decisions because lives literally depend on it. Democracy, I would argue, depends on it. There's a lot at stake. And it is stunning the extent to which business leaders are not focused on how to answer these questions for themselves right now.
And so let's take the null hypothesis for a second, which is several companies, including Coinbase, notably, sort of took the shut up and dribble approach of, we should only comment on things that are as closely related to our mission as possible. Of course, it then raises what's related to the mission. It sounds like you reject that general framework, or maybe not. Maybe it's a matter of definition.
That's not neutral. I mean, that is, by doing that, you are
that is a stand. Okay.
Yes.
So then in that case, but then by definition, almost anything is a stand other than silence. And in a world, so now let me ask it this way, which is, in a world where literally every day there is something tragic, something important, something wonderful, something that is a social issue happening, how does one decide how much effort and attention to ask a company to put in to taking a stand on Rob Elementary or what happened in Ukraine, or pick your, the newest COVID variant or whatever the thing is?
Yeah, well, let's start with Ukraine, because it's at one end of the continuum or one end of the spectrum here. Companies that almost never take a stand. McDonald's, we're not just talking about Nike, which has been out front on a lot of social issues. I mean, you've got massive multinational corporations that avoid these issues like I would say a plague, although over the last couple of years, I'm not sure I can say that, pulling out of Russia and saying we're taking a stand here. So that was a big enough issue. There was such a clear right and wrong, and the implications were significant enough.
And there was law too, right? I mean, there were sanctioned parties, and the government gave guidance to businesses on what to do in that case.
But even I think even without that, there was such a clear fight between good and evil here, and it probably bled over to shareholder value for some of them. The analysis actually was, it's in our shareholder interest to forego short-term revenue and get out of there. But so that's at one end of the spectrum. We can probably come up with a dozen examples off the top of our heads at the far other end of the spectrum. Should they put
where
a
it's ambiguous, sign? You mean?
Yeah, well, or a hyper-local issue. Should there be a stop sign at the corner, right? Which is a public question, but not one that probably McDonald's needs to weigh in on. The question of where you jump in is complicated, and what I'm arguing is that rather than avoiding everything because it's complicated, we've got to get in the mess and figure it out.
We need a tradecraft of how to do it.
We need a tradecraft. It's exactly right. We need a process. We need a framework for the decision making, and it is no exaggeration to say that lives are literally on the line here. I mean, yesterday is as terrible an example of that as one can imagine. I've been having a series of conversations with business leaders, primarily CEOs or people who run pretty sizable business units, and there are a couple of things here that I'm frankly stunned by. The biggest probably is the lack of awareness of how big the stakes are. And the second is a sense that, we're focused on shareholder value and these public fights have nothing to do with shareholder value. And I immediately point to South Africa. And I point to South Africa because there are two reasons that South Africa did not descend into civil war in apartheid. One was Mandela being willing to make peace, the critical factor. But the second was the business community going to the white ruling party and saying, we're getting crushed by sanctions. We have to end apartheid. We cannot function without it. And civil war will be even worse for us. And so really the business community is the second biggest factor in why South Africa is a functioning democracy today. The other note is just, we came dangerously close to autocracy. Political scientists who analyze this, who look at data, tell us that the US actually fell out of being a democracy on January 6th. We were classified as what's called an anocracy, neither an autocracy nor a democracy. We were in a middle zone there.
I hate learning new words. No, I love learning new words, but not in that context.
No, I mean, and we came back out after Biden actually took office and restored some norms, but these countries are scored on a scale of -10, North Korea at a +10, what the US used to be. And we're hovering kind of around an 8 right now, but we're at risk of sliding right back. And what happens in autocracies, and again, business leaders are not focused on this, is there tends to be one winner in each category, right? The autocrat prefers a winner because they are bribing, they are a friend, they are whatever, and they get the crown, and everyone else either muddles along or gets crushed or has their business actually taken away from them. And there's this sense that it can't happen here. It can. Every country that's gone through this has said it can't happen here. And so rather than avoiding the complicated at times questions of should we weigh into this issue, if I comment on this tragedy, do I have to comment on every other tragedy? If I comment on something that is a racial justice related issue and I don't comment on something that is a gender justice related issue, am I going to get blowback? We've got to get into the mess and figure it out because lives and democracy are at stake.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely I buy both the view that it's too important to stand aside and the view that, stakeholder capitalism, which isn't exactly the phrase you used, but stakeholder capitalism and long-term shareholder capitalism seem kind of equivalent to me. It's like, and I think about it in the startup context where the businesses have some existential risk. They may not exist in 6 to 12 months. And it does change the calculus because it changes the reasons for engaging and the range of ways you engage and also how much power you have. Like, some startup that has 3 people, issuing a statement is just not the same as McDonald's issuing a statement or something like that. And so, the phrase that often comes up for me in these cases is just timing and dosage. It's like, just because, it's sort of like you take a vitamin and it's not like you say, well, I took the vitamin, but because I took a vitamin, does that mean I now have to take every vitamin? It's like, no, you make judgments about exactly where you draw the line. And I guess the question that then begs, and maybe this is a subject for a future conversation, is how do I, in my particular company, whether I'm the leader or I'm an employee or a person working for the company who's just agitating for the company to do something, where do I choose to draw the line? And some of it can just be based on what is subjectively, personally important to you, because CEOs do care about the issues that matter to their employees. And then some of it is, you come up, better to have some standard that's imperfect and have it evolve over time than not to. And I kind of feel like this is one of these areas where in corporate life, we still live in a place of misdirection. Like, I don't know who to ask about that. There isn't any clearly stated policy. It's hard to figure one out. Yeah.
So let's use the advice that virtually every tech VC would give their early stage company if we were not talking about taking a stand, but we were talking about shipping a product.
Okay, great. I love this way of thinking about it. Yeah. How would you frame that?
You tell me. Should we spend 9 more months working on it to get it to 95% good, or at 80% should we launch?
Yeah, of course. And I mean, I think that the thing there is, especially for early companies, focus is so much more valuable than it even is at bigger companies. Because, like, let's be honest, at many big companies, 3/4 of the management team could fall asleep for 2 years and nothing bad would happen. In fact, many companies are specifically designed that way. But I think that means, therefore, you spend less time on it. You figure out what's really important for you. You say, the reason we're speaking out on this issue is because, despite the fact that we have all these other things we need to do, it's just that important to us. And the other thing is, for me, there's also an acceptance of imperfection that we have to do here. I don't think we should be slapping out at every imperfection every time. It's okay to be critical, but you can be critical and say, you know what, it's good that they're doing something, and let's push them to do something else. And let's just have a reasonable conversation about it where not everything has to be perfect.
Yeah, it's progress over piety, or progress over
right. Progress over piety. That's a perfect way to put it.
That's the idea. And yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. What are your values as a company, right? And so if you have a employee in a 6, 10, 12 person company who says, hey, this really matters to me, and is there anything we could do here? That employee is a pretty big stakeholder. Maybe good to have that conversation, even if you don't have a perfect process for how you're going to engage on this question versus that question.
And even how we talk with each other about it, I feel like we just don't know yet. Here, I'm just going to share one of the LinkedIn comments that we got live. Chris Miller, I don't know what Chris was responding to. Go woke, go broke. I literally, in reading this, have no idea if that means go woke because you must, or else you go broke, or don't do it because your company will fail, or what. My point is, we don't even know what we're saying to each other yet. And so having precise ways of thinking about these things instead of slogans and tribes and, well, if you said that, you must be one of those people. You know, I kind of think if we don't do that, and by the way, arguably the big modern American corporation is, sadly, the most diverse institution we have in the United States, because it includes people who have different political beliefs and different backgrounds, and they got to figure out together how to coordinate in some way.
Yeah, and I'm inferring that Chris is not aligned with my perspective on this. And I guess what I would say to Chris and to everyone else is, let's take every other issue off the table. Let's just focus on American democracy. Do we believe in it? I mean, if you don't believe in it, fine. It's a completely separate conversation. But if you believe that we should have a functional democracy, right? Don't corporations and therefore business leaders play a critical role in it working? And isn't that a place we can agree that maybe we should draw the line, right? So even if we don't want to get into what happened yesterday and gun issues and other issues that, you know, are not perceived as human rights issues by at least some portion of our friends in the world, let's just stick with democracy. And what can we do? And so this is where it's like, you can get really granular here. I was in a conversation with a friend of mine I live and work in Los Angeles and work with some bigger name talent. I was talking to one of them who's in business with 3 companies. Between them, or among them, they probably have, I don't know, 30, 40,000 hourly wage workers. And she was saying, what can I do? I was like, well, what if you went to each of the CEOs and said, it's really important to me that hourly wage workers are able to vote, and I'd love for you to consider giving everyone at least a half day, if not a full day, paid day for election day until it's a holiday. Well, that's totally doable, right? I mean, that to me just feels like a core American value, that you should be able to participate in democracy, right? Yeah. So we can argue about in the gray where you should be, where you shouldn't be, go woke, go broke, fine. But can we agree on that? It feels like we should be able to.
Yeah, I mean, I think picking some fundamental issues, and I think that is a hard one to argue with, and then grappling with the tough stuff. I mean, if you have a national corporation in the United States, chances are a sizable portion of your employee base or working community believes that the election was stolen. And all right, we got to engage and have those conversations versus let's put our heads down and call it just politics, because, you know, we may not have the luxury of calling it just politics if that's what we do. And so, you know, if the one line kind of idea here is you can't opt out, you have to engage in it, I think that is so powerful and necessary.
Well, and I want to drive home for a quick second, if I can, Roy, on this question of whether the election was stolen and all that. I mean, AT&T, massive company, customers, employees all over the political spectrum. After January 6th, and by the way, their lobbying arm is run by Ed Gillespie, who, you know, like is a massive figure in Republican politics, used to run the Republican National Committee. They suspended donations to Republican elected officials who supported the insurrection. Okay, that was a big step for them. And then very quietly, just a matter of weeks later, they resumed those donations. Well, was this optics? Was this just to cater to, where are your values? And if you stand with democracy, why aren't you staying there? And I appreciate the answer is like, well, we need them because we're regulated and we need them to vote for us, what have you. Well, do you? Because in an autocracy, you may or may not be the winner. And gosh, it's really dangerous for business if the US falls out of democracy again.
Yeah, I mean, when you say that, what I hear is there's this attitude toward business is there as like a participant in this grand market and reads trends and what do people believe and want and responds to them. And of course, that's true. I think what you're describing is the responsibility of business, not as reader, but as writer, which is that business also gets to shape all of those things. And by the way, so does every other community. So do labor organizations and advocacy groups. But for business to shirk it or to only do it in a way that is driven by perception, I think it misses a chance to make the entire economy and society more stable for everybody. Parting thoughts?
I mean, I would argue it's anti-American.
And anti-American. I love that.
It really is. Capitalism and democracy thrive together. They thrive together. And we need more business leaders to commit to supporting American democracy and taking a stand where it is appropriate for their shareholders and stakeholders. And we need a framework to get there.
I love it. All right. Well, an unusually deep conversation. I really appreciate it, Jeff. And I feel like, you know, for those who are watching for the first time, the reason we call it Not Advice is neither of us is saying we know your circumstance and what to do. We're sharing our own experiences, obviously strong points of view that both of us hold on what folks should do, but they're just our points of view. And if you want to go look and see other past questions and answers, you can find them, and you'll be able to find this one too on thisisnotadvice.org. And I feel like, you know, once we have good frameworks for how to do this, the next one we should do should be about how. So thank you, Jeff. To be continued.